Ever since the world found out about your powers, a lot of your old enemies have come crawling out of the woodwork.
Ben's public identity now attracting villains is a neat premise, but the ones featured in this episode already knew Ben's identity to begin with, so it has less of an impact. In fact, nearly all of Ben's villains already knew who he was, they just didn't really seem to care. Charmcaster easily outclasses Zombozo and Volcanus, especially after her power boost since returning in AF, so it's very odd that she would team up with them. In fact, it's surprising that Zombozo got anyone to team up with him period, let alone a total of 12 villains on and off screen. Most team-ups in Ben 10 never make sense anyways, but this group of people was definitely out there. The fact that 7-7 is defeated by Max with a Batman utility belt just goes to show how lame this villain really is. But it's also a credit to Max, as apparently he took down 9 whole villains by himself before the trio even noticed. Also, this might be the only time we see him fly the Rust Bucket 3 without the trio either. Rojo's return was another failed attempt to capitalize on the classic series' success. Anyways, this episode plays out pretty much exactly how you'd expect it to, right up until the end, when we have Gwen transform into an Anodite to intimidate Zombozo. It was a pretty great scene to really show how threatening she can be, but coming off the tail end of a very mediocre episode, it was hard to appreciate it in the moment. Zombozo's return was alright. With his voice, personality, and powers, he's a completely different character than classic Zombozo, and while his circus-style arsenal is amusing, he is much less threatening than his first appearance, and a lot less interesting. His introduction implying he just came from burying a dead body was dope though. It was nice to have the return of Sandra and Carl. His parents are always fun characters, and definitely deserve more screen time.
My body and spirit are in total balance, son.
Charmcaster, however, felt very nerfed. She went from having potential to take over the Earth to getting smacked around by Kevin.
Try harder.
Even she acknowledges this, further showing why their team-up is ridiculous.
I could have finally finished Gwen off if you'd just let me. I'm better off on my own.
Her rock monsters were uncharacteristically more frail than normal too. Max and the main trio were written fine. There's the small thread of Kevin wanting to kill the villains rather than simply defeat them, which Gwen is against. It feels a bit useless and ultimately has no resolution. Overall, the characters were passable in this episode, but everyone felt a bit dull. The visuals for this episode were very average. Nothing to complain about, but nothing to get excited over either. That confetti scene was pretty rough though, but they did do some pretty great establishing shots for the abandoned pier, which is rare for UAF. Ultimate Big Chill showing up was okay. We've seen Volcanus and his pickaxe aliens get defeated super easily many times before, so he didn't really feel needed, and he was only really there to make sure the audience doesn't forget about the going ultimate gimmick. We're only on episode 3, and it already feels like this show's entire gimmick doesn't feel like it has any true direction, and this really does just feel like more of Alien Force so far. This episode is good in a world building sense, as it continues to help establish Ben's new life as a public hero and the consequences of his reputation. But as for the overall story of Ben 10, it's pretty skippable. Like I said, this episode was pretty mediocre. It had some interesting moments, but it wasn't that great. It was neat to see all the villains return, but after a few seconds, that interest wears off pretty fast. It was definitely a step up from Duped, but that's not really saying much. So far, Ultimate Alien doesn't seem to have that great of a start.
If any of you ever attacks one of our loved ones, this is what awaits you.